maybe more. Are we started? Yes. This is our budget advocate training, and our presenter today is Jacob Wexler, Chief of the Finance Group. He's from the Office of the City Administrative Officer, and we are very pleased to have him here today because he is totally knowledgeable. And this is like a grad class talking about budgets for cities. In this case, the city of Los Angeles. Jacob, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. And hi, everybody. Good evening. The thought is this is like a budget 101, but if there's so many familiar faces I see in the room, it probably should be like a seminar level, but it is still 101. I guess it never hurts to go over the fundamentals. Even basketball players, work on their dribbling. So. Here we go. If we could get started. Freddie, again, I am Jacob Wexler. I'm the Chief of the Finance Group at the Office of the City Administrative Officer. My group is responsible for coordinating the mayor's budget process. We also then turn around and staff the council during the council deliberations of the budget. And during the course of the year, we also are the ones who are kind of responsible for budget control, which means that we're the ones who prepare the financial status reports and sort of are the watchdogs of the reserve fund, and generally are responsible for providing input and analysis of big citywide policies that impact the proposals and budgets would have, or budget proposals or requests for departments would have, looking at it from kind of that macro perspective. So if we could just get started, feel free, this can be a conversation. The session is intended to stretch across 2 different sessions, so there's a lot of slides. We won't get through the whole thing. The intent is not to get through the whole thing. We'll probably go for a couple hours and then pick it up again next Tuesday for people who want to attend. It could be a different set of people. We'll see how far we get, but feel free to ask any questions or make any comments at any point during, and we can have a conversation. The urgency will be next week, trying to get it done. Today we can get as far as we can. So. The main purpose of this presentation really is to really provide tools for you as you embark on analyzing the budget, the 2021 budget, and also as your role in as budget advocates, you undoubtedly will be looking at the current year budget or any issues that come up in the city. But the point is to help you to sort of develop and think about those tools. And when I think about it, just sort of the macro level, which is what are the city's goals and policies? How should we, what kind of big picture decisions do we need to be thinking about when we're making recommendations or decisions related to the budget? Kind of that macro view. So a lot of this will help you to get a sense of kind of those macro issues, at least from the way that we look at them in our office. Some of the citywide policies. But also, I hope that some of the tools that you get will help you to look also at the micro level. Looking more specifically at the individual department requests, because I know that many of you or all of you will be out meeting with departments and talking about the specific things that they're asking for. So I hope that some of what you get today is an ability to really dig in and challenge departments or help to refine some of the requests that they may be making. In addition, a general goal is to just kind of make sure that you have a solid understanding of the budget process itself. As I'll say when we get to that point, probably next week. That's really important because if you want to impact or influence the outcomes of the budget, you need to know where to push when. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in this presentation as well. So the summary, this is sort of the different topics we're going to go over. Again, this is not all for this week. This will be this week and next week. I will start by talking about some of the main documents that you may want to look at if you want to do additional research. I do that first because that way when I reference them later on in the presentation, you'll know what they are. Give some big picture, sort of an overview of the 1920 budget, this year's budget, and then sort of provide that view of both revenues and expenditures, looking at the levels of revenues and what changed from last year to this year, and some of the concerns that we have about revenues, and similarly with expenditures, what are we spending the money on in the 1920 budget? Obviously, we'll discuss weather-related costs because it's such a driver and kind of risks associated with the amounts that are budgeted for this year. Not only does this give you a good view of the 1920 budget, but it also, I think, will help you to kind of get a sense of how we look at the budget and where we see the pressure points. Then we'll have to take a little while to talk about the 4-year budget outlook. Jack will be looking forward to that part of the discussion. His alternative outlook.
Relation to pension funds,
Undoubtedly
yes.
we'll discuss. And then we dig into the city's financial policies, which is definitely a macro view. How do you analyze budget? What are the important things that we look at to show this is a responsible budget? And then we'll talk about the budget process. And something new this year that Barbara and I talked about, we added some slides for how to analyze a budget request. And this is actually sort of you'll be the first, you're the beta version, is that what they call it? The first version of this presentation. This year we've added training for CEO budget analysts to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page as to how we do our analysis. And these are kind of the current versions of the slides that we're going to be showing them probably next week. And then finally, the resources that's sort of a recap of the budget documents. So that's where we're going to go. Any questions at this point? Okay, then let's start with the budget documents. Off back and forth. So I'm going to go through the 2 sets of budget documents. So the documents that the mayor presents, which are the proposed budget documents. The mayor presents a budget on April 20th or thereabouts of each year. And then the adopted budget documents. These are the documents that that get, after the council makes its changes and goes through the approval process, we republish some of the documents with the actual numbers that were sort of the final budget numbers. So starting with, these are the documents that come out around April 20th. The first one that you should be aware of is the mayor's budget summary. This is a sort of a thinner book. It's really a statement of the mayor's primary goals for the budget. It's he's going to call out some of the big decisions that were made, some of the high-profile items that are being funded. It's really a statement of his goals. It doesn't dig into too much of the details. It's really presenting the message to the mayor as to what he's hoping to achieve through his budget. The proposed budget book, meanwhile, is actually it's a much more technical book. It provides the summary data, appropriations by line item, sources of funds, the distribution of funding by function. This is kind of the book that gets adopted, right? This is like where the money is actually going. And looking at it without anything else, you don't really know what we're spending the money on or what services are being provided. But at the same time, this is the information that gets entered into our financial systems. It's kind of, this is, I guess, the budget. But because it doesn't provide a lot of detail about sort of the goals and the services that are being provided, we have these the detailed departmental programs, which we call the Blue Book. And that comes in 2 volumes. And what this really shows is 2 things. First, well, there's some general statements about budget policy and the budget process. So it's a good sort of primer on the budget process if you were to read that in the beginning of volume 1. But it also goes through by department what the changes are from last year's budget to the proposed budget. So it's sort of incremental budgeting in that sense. It's not going to tell you everything that the department is already doing, but if there's any changes, then those items, which would be kind of the main things that the council is going to want to discuss anyway, these are the changes to the budget, whether you're adding a program or deleting a program, adding services or staffing, changing the cost of something. These are detailed department by department. And for each department, it's listed program by program. Budget programs are sort of broad sets of similar services that the departments provide. So and also just with the mayor now and his focus on performance budgeting, we've added sort of metrics for each one of the programs, so you get a general sense of what it is that the mayor is trying to achieve through these programs. And it shows historical and targets for these metrics. So in other words, what are we achieving? What are we buying with this money that you're sort of that's being identified in this program? And then in the back of the second volume, there's some of the higher profile, so non-department. So what's a non-department? Maybe it's a special fund, maybe it's something like liability claims account, sort of different accounts and things that aren't necessarily handled in a department, but they may be important to the budget process. So for example, how much are we paying, if you want to see a discussion of human resources benefits, the payments that we're making for healthcare and other kind of benefits, that's described in here. There's discussions of the pensions, of the tax and revenue anticipation notes, which is super technical, but some people are into that. So it's that kind of stuff. Like, what's that? Yeah. So for those types of things that are not necessarily a program that's run by a department, but still have a major impact on the budget, there's detail for the ones that we think are most important back there. And obviously the mayor wants us to put in as well. So it's a really, there's a good discussion of the sidewalk program, and there's a discussion of the pavement program. There's actually some really interesting things in the back of the book. That's where you're going to find the discussion of the homeless budget is going to be back there. Yeah.
Around what percentage of the total budget do those special items tend to make up, and does it tend to vary a lot from year to year?
There's not a huge variation in terms of percentage that it makes up from year to year. There is an exhibit that has department and non-department, and it's in the budget book, and it's closer to half. It's under half, but I think it's probably around maybe somewhere between a third and 30 and 40%, I would guess. There's some big ticket items in here. Like this is where we fund the pensions. Human resources benefits is a huge. Our benefits are. This is where those types of things are funded. So there are actually some really big ticket items in there. Liability claims is $100 million. So these are big ticket items, but they're kind of citywide, and so that's kind of why we want to put them in there, because they are such kind of big ticket items. And you'll find that breakdown somewhere in the proposed budget book. So when you go to page budget, you'll see the department, non-department. That's what the non-department ones are, and they'll tell you what they are and how much is for each one of them.
Okay.
I don't know if this is a time to ask you or not, and I know Jack's probably going to want to touch upon it when you get to that point, but I know we historically underfund the pension fund every budget, every year, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. Like they only give a, say, I don't have the facts in front of me, so I'm going to say 5.5%. They say you're getting, but you only get 3.5 or whatever. It's not really that low, but I'm just saying it's by comparison. You see what I'm saying? So it constantly gets larger and larger and larger till it's in the billions. How are we going to address that? How do we stop it from growing out of control and taking us down the path to bankruptcy?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about pensions specifically later, but let me just respond to that by saying, and I'll say this again when we get there, the amount that the council and the amount that the budget includes for pensions every year is based on the
annual required contribution.
The annual required contribution. So this is an amount that's calculated based on a third-party analysis by an actuary. They tell us what the contribution rate is. The boards adopt it generally pretty similar to what what's being recommended. And the mayor and council, and over my tenure, have always fully funded that art. In fact, there's a city policy that says that we have to. So yeah, we are not 100% funded in the pension funds, but you're permitted within this sort of best practices to spread some of those costs for prior losses or actual or experiential differences. Maybe people are living longer than you expect. You're allowed to spread some of those costs over different periods of time, 15 years, 7 years, 30 years, depending on what those costs are. So a lot of the underfunding is really related to, where we're at now, but it doesn't mean that we're paying a portion of that down every single year. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeanette, very simply is the issue. The city is going out there and funding 100% of the annual required contribution.
Right.
They do that every year.
Right.
In addition to which, the city is way ahead of the county and the state in that they're financing their other post-employment benefits.
Oh, I like that.
Post-retirement medical benefits.
Okay.
So the city gets, and they've been doing that since
For
the
years.
late 80s.
Yeah.
The issue that you have with the pensions is basically the investment rate assumption, and that's my pitch. But the city, based on the assumptions, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing a lot more than the county and the state.
So it is true, if we were to lower our estimated rate from 7% to 5%, then yes.
Yeah.
But based on the rate that's been adopted, we're fully funding. So I think thank you
Okay,
for
so
making
you're
that
doing
clear.
that. I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's nice to know we're doing better than the county because they have more money.
So we'll have slides that kind of show that. We'll talk about pensions a lot more later. But yes, you would find that up in here somewhere. Okay, let me move on to the revenue outlook, which is the book that's really going to be providing a detail of where the revenues are coming from. In this book, there's some really interesting in the front exhibits and discussions and analyses of kind of our big tax incomes, property tax, sales tax, business tax, which we'll talk a little bit about more later. So you can find charts and analysis and details, but most of the pages are dedicated to our departmental receipts, which is license, permits, fees, and fines, which says for each one of the departments, how much are they generating in this very huge amalgamated category of revenues. They're not tax revenues, and that's where the detail is for those. So a lot of the stuff you're looking at, like page after page of numbers, and you don't quite know what that means. Really for this book, if you want to get that big picture of where our revenues are coming from, the first 20, 30 pages is actually pretty interesting. It's a pretty good read for those taxes, and then the rest of it is a little bit just sort of numbers on a page. And then finally, there's a supporting information book for the Budget and Finance Committee. These books up here, these are really the books that we produce for the mayor. So for this one, a little less. So these really are reflecting the mayor's recommendations. This is a book that the CEO produces at the request of the Budget and Finance Committee. So this includes stuff that we would put in kind of that's in our own analysis. So for example, the outlook, which we'll discuss, and some of the detail and the information analysis that we do of financial policies, kind of some of the big pictures. There's a lot of different things in there. We're going to actually try to reorganize it this year to have it a little bit more easy to find categories of things. So right now, they're kind of the things aren't random pages. But this is sort of the CEO's take on the budget, based on requests specifically of information that we get every year from the Budget and Finance Committee. So those are the proposed documents, the adopted budget documents. There's an adopted budget, which is essentially a restatement of the proposed budget with the changes that the council made. This book is not published yet. The controller publishes it. They have the data. It should be posted, I would say, in the relatively near future. But it'll be up there so you can see actually what the numbers were after they've been approved by council. Yeah?
Isn't that the 2018-19, shouldn't it be 1920?
Well, the 18, yes, it should be 1920. The 18-19 books are published. The 1920 are not published. Sorry.
Couldn't resist.
Yeah. But there may be others in there. But by next week that'll be different, but you won't see the slide again. And then the budget summary. This is a pamphlet that we produce. This is a little pamphlet. Usually we'll give it to you guys, and I was hoping to have some copies, but it's not done. So sorry, that's my group.
Bummer.
My bad. This one's up though. This is also my group, so we're batting 50%. The controller's at 0, but it's probably our fault also. But anyway, but this is basically a restatement of the blue book of the detail department. The white book is basically showing those changes, and you can actually see what changes the council made. So if there's an item that the mayor proposed and the council changed it, any changes that the council made, there'll be a separate paragraph below, and you can see the detail of sort of text description of what the council did to change the mayor's budget. So if you're wondering, what did the council do with that police thing? Go to the police department, find the item, and you'll see that identified. And also we'll update the non-departmental pages. It's essentially these books, but updated for what the mayor had, for what the
And
council
who
did.
prepares the white book?
That's my group also.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Oh, busy boy.
So, yeah. But this one's actually a lot thinner, but, whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah, sorry.
Okay. But,
I
yeah.
have a question. So basically the white book is everything that's in the blue book plus the changes that the councilman's office.
Yeah, exactly, restated for the changes that the council made. So you'll see what the mayor proposed, and if there's a change, right beneath it, you'll see a little description of what changes the council made. In the back of the book, it'll be the same kind of the original document, and then changes will be put in bold.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah, so you'll just see the
Nice.
non-departmental
Make it
stuff.
easier to find.
Super effective.
Yeah, so it's good.
One thing, the difference between the proposed budget and the adopted budget is very small, at least in the aggregate. You may have a bunch of changes, but it's, maybe like
Minuscule.
0.5% in that.
Okay.
Yeah, the amounts aren't that big, but boy, we spent a lot of time talking about it. So.
Yeah, exactly.
To get there, is plenty of work and discussion. So,
Sure,
all right.
they don't want a bunch.
Let's roll on. So now the next part of the presentation is really kind of a big picture overview of the budget. So this is like what makes up the city's budget, how much is it, just kind of big so you can kind of get the scope of it. The full budget, the total city government, is a $31.5 billion budget, and there are 53,000 city employees. It's a big department, I know. It's a big
Is that positions or employees?
That is position authorities. And that's actually both, yes, position authorities, regular and resolution position authorities, all position authorities, not employees.
How many employees are there?
I don't have that number, but my guess is that the vacancy rate citywide is probably between 5 and 10%.
Okay.
So that's just top of my head.
Not that much, okay.
It's, well, depends on who you ask.
It's,
I mean,
yeah,
if you're
for some
expecting
people it's a
services,
lot.
is minus 10%, right? So
Yeah.
it's you know, there's a lot of turnover. It's a big organization. When the economy is humming along, maybe, you know, city employment is not quite as attractive, and then, so,
Or they don't, it takes 2 years to get it through HR.
sometimes it takes a while to get through the personnel department. So and you know, we're still recovering actually from Europe. And I'll show some slides later that kind of show how far below, even in authorities. And authorities and positions, they do kind of track each other a little bit because, you know, one of the ways that we try to balance the budget is that if there's a bunch of vacancies in the department, we just may eliminate those positions. I mean, we pay for every position,
Right.
less the salary stages. We basically are
nobody in
paying for the positions, but there's nobody in it, and we're trying to, you know, save money for a new program, then we'll just cut some of those vacant positions, or recommend that. And then you can generate some savings, which you can put towards other things. Yeah.
So, I went to building and safety the last couple of years,
Uh-huh.
and so I don't know what some of the other departments, but that when somebody retires,
Yeah.
so that is an empty position,
Yeah.
but then they hire them back as an outside vendor or
Consultant.
whatever,
Yeah.
so they're really still paying.
So the city charter does permit the city to hire people back after they've retired on 120-day appointments. I guess so, eventually they also can hire them back, you know, if they get a second job as a contractor. So the 120s are really you know, somebody can come in for a total of 120 days over the course of a year. So it's about 6 months
Oh, okay.
out of the year. And they need to have a position available, so they may hold a position vacant to bring somebody in to do that work. You know, it's a great way to kind of capture back some of that expertise. You know, from the employee's perspective, they're retired, they're getting their retirement, which is nice, and they're working part-time, so they still have time to vacation, extra salary. I mean, it's, you know, it's a
win-win
good
for
gig.
them.
It's kind of a win-win. You
Well,
know,
for them.
It's definitely, yeah. So they don't have to do it, you know, if they want.
What's the difference between a sworn staff and an authorized position?
Okay, thank you. So I broke it down into, so this number here is the full amount of the general fund staff, 24,000. Sworn is police and fire. So of the general fund positions, which is about 25,000, 56% of them are police officers and firefighters. So it just shows that you know, that's where the city's putting its focus
Which
really
is a
is.
good idea.
So what's driving the numbers being higher than maybe what you're used to seeing is the proprietary departments. You'll see, you know, $19 million and 16,000 positions are in the harbor and the airport and EWP. When we go through the budget process, however, you know, it's the council control departments, which is departments that you think about, you know, your building and safety, your planning, police, fire, the ones that the council really has direct authority over. They're not proprietary, they're not independently run, you know, hoping to run them like businesses or something like that. So when we talk about the budget, this is really what we focus on. You know, when you're meeting with departments, you're going to be meeting with departments that are sort of in this category. So the next slide will dig in a little bit more to the general city budget, like the council control department. So if you move on to the next slide, real quick.
What is the
yeah.
grants and other non-budgeted funds? What would that consist of?
And it's sort of grant funding that we receive that it's handled off budget. So we get a lot of transportation grants, a lot of public safety grants. It's not really, you know, they come in during the course of the year. They may operate on a separate schedule. So not all that money is budgeted. So for example, we budget some money for the comp plan, you know, the money that we get from the federal government for social services, housing, support, economic development support. Some of the money that supports administration is on budget, and that's part of that 10 million, but a whole bunch of that money for the actual programs, you know, maybe it's for the contractors or for the projects that we're doing, that's handled off budget, and that will show up in that grants line item. So, it's, you know, a lot of transportation grants aren't necessarily going to be part of you know, we'll pay for the administration of them, but through the budget, but sort of the actual payment for the project itself is going to be handled as a grant, kind of an off budget, which is why there's no positions listed with those grants. There are positions in the city that support grants, but those are funded, you know, through those grants and sort of in the general city budget. Yeah.
So it's just kind of treated like a special purpose entity type thing. It's off to the side. We need to acknowledge this, but these numbers aren't getting put on our budget. It's something that moves through us essentially.
It's something that moves through us, yeah, which is why we put it in that full city government bucket, but when we talk about what we're sort of controlling and who we're hiring for, it's not going to come in and go to city staff. It's going to come in and go to outside sort of outside entities that are providing that work.
And the administrative numbers are already in the general
So
city.
for the most part,
budget.
administrative numbers are already going to be,
Okay.
and yeah, it's a little, we're not 100% consistent, but for the most part, yeah. So this is the part that when you talk about the budget, you think about general fund and special fund. The general fund is sort of our unrestricted funds. This is mostly our tax revenue, money that comes into the city that really city leaders can decide to spend on it, where their priorities lie. This table is showing the changes from 1819 to 1920, so from last year to this year's budget. The general fund is $6.6 billion, which was an increase of 6.1%, which is a big,
Pretty good.
it's a big year. Last couple of years have been big years like that. The special funds, which is, this is where you're going to get your trash pickup, building and safety, the things that are paid for by dedicated fees and sort of used strictly for those purposes. That represents about $4 million of the city's budget, up from 3.7 in 1819, which also had a huge increase of 11.6%. When the economy's humming, it's humming.
Is there some place in there that says how we got from that number to that? Some of it might be inflation, but there's other things.
Yeah, so if you were to go back and look through the blue book or the white book, then you would actually see summary information, but also department by department. You can see
How you got from there.
how you got from there to there. So it breaks down actually every single one of those dollars is going to be explained in that white book. It'll be spread out so you won't, and there's probably some, I'm trying to think offhand, like if you were to like kind of where the best summary information would be, I'm sure that, I can't think offhand where we would have, I'm sure we have a table somewhere that shows last year's budget by department to this year's, and you kind of see the big jump, so I want to focus on those. Or you could go and you could focus on the departments that you're most interested in and see how much did police get. Police got $47 million or something like that for overtime. So that represents a chunk of the, $3.5, $4 million increase that we got, 380 million. So it's all kind of detailed in those books. The positions, the general fund positions bumped up by 2.1%, special fund by 3.1%, the total increase 2.4%. So we added about 900 positions to the city departments last year, which also was kind of a lot. We had a couple of years like this. This is not, normal. We're talking more in the 3-4% range. So we've had a couple of years. I can tell you that going through the budget development process never feels easy to balance the budget. But when you look back, like, ooh, we got 6.1%, you always feel like, oh, it should have been easy this year with that amount of money, but it never is. So that's a summary of that. Okay. So I'm going to leave the overview. Any other sort of general questions about the city budget, scope, size? Yeah, okay. And the next section, yeah.
One of the things that might be helpful is you just go year to year.
Yeah.
How about a 10-year spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Not maybe in your thing, so you can really get trends.
Yeah.
Both in revenues and expenditures, or just. I'm looking at it as an analyst.
Yeah.
You go down there, you go down to Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and you put together your presentation. They're not going to want to look at 1 year. They're going to look at a period of years plus projections. Just a suggestion.
That's it. We do have a 10-year history of the general fund in the supporting information book, and I think we have that detail available in the different books. But it does kind of, you're right, maybe for future presentations to show that would give people that sense of where we've gone. And also a sense of, there'll be a slide later that shows the revenue changes, so that'll give some sense, but.
Melissa did a chart for me a while ago.
Full revenues.
Revenues, yes.
Yeah, we used to put that in our presentation. It was this chart that had like a lot of different colored layers on it, and it kind of showed, but it was a little hard to know exactly what was going on.
In a microscope to see it.
Yeah. Big picture budget revenues has to equal expenditures. The amount of money that the city gets in is the amount of money that the city can spend, not a dime more. It all starts with revenues. So for the next little while, I want to talk to you about revenues. And what the main focus here is sort of what are the main revenues that the city receives, how have they changed in the last year, what are some of the concerns that we might have about revenues going forward. This is sort of in that macro view. So this chart, this table is sort of starting with just the major sources of general fund revenue. The idea here is to give you a sense of where the money is coming from in general, what the big ticket items are. You know, I know that when you meet with departments, they're not really going to talk about revenues. Revenues are super important, and I think it's important to understand where they're coming from in the city. I mean, you can, and then there's some kind of takeaways, but I'll just run down them. You know, the biggest single source of revenue is our property taxes, about $2.2 billion. And we make those estimates based on really that estimate, the amount that we think we're going to get is driven by what the county's assessor is telling us is what the growth is going to be for the next year. It's a, you know, $2.2 billion. These are general fund revenues, so this is the subset of the $6.6 billion, not the full $10.7 billion. The special fund revenues are really fees that are supporting those specific programs. So the next slides are going to be focusing on that general fund piece, the unrestricted piece, the piece that the mayor and council have discretion to spend on different things. So the biggest single item, like I said, is the property tax, $2.2 billion. The second biggest piece is license, permit, fees, and fines. This is not one revenue. This is hundreds, probably close to 1,000 different sources of revenues.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that broken down any place?
In the revenue outlook, which we call the Green Book, and actually we're going to publish for the first time ever an adopted Green Book this year. It's on the slide next. But so if you look at that, you can see by department each one of the different revenue sources. You know, they're a little bit obscure just to read on the list, but there's also some summary information that provides a little more detail about some of the bigger movers. The biggest part of this is actually related cost reimbursements. And what this means is that when I say the biggest part, I don't mean half, like a plurality, the biggest sort of single component. Related cost reimbursements, this is, so the city's special funds, like building and safety, you know, they provide services and they get permit fees, which basically run their operation. But the city, outside the Department of Building and Safety, also supports those efforts, right? The CEO has staff that provides oversight of the building safety department. Council and mayor provide support. ITA, general services, we pay for power, we pay for rent. So there's all sorts of other components to supporting building safety other than just what they pay for in their budget. So the city can recoup those costs by charging related costs against those special funds. And so this happens many times over for many, many different special funds. Those are related costs. Those come in as revenue to the general fund, which the general fund can then spend on, what it has discretion to spend on, but really goes back to supporting the department because actually the amounts of the related costs are calculated based on that level of support. Yeah.
Who's in charge of collecting those fees and fines? I know in the past, the big issue was the parking fees that the owners or people who had the parking lots weren't paying the city tax.
Right.
Has something been done to
address that? Yeah. So parking, the parking tax is actually not collected through license, permit, fees, and fines. And it's actually not one of the top 9, so it's not on this list. But there is like a parking users tax that's also collected, and I don't think I've put on it. So it's a smaller amount. Who's responsible for the oversight of that? Whoever's administering those lots. I hope that we're doing a better job than we were. I can't. I don't know the ins and outs, but I'm sure. I can't really answer that specifically.
In some books,
Yeah.
they call it parking occupancy tax.
Yes, it's called parking occupancy tax, and it's
It's at the bottom.
probably that's parking fines. This is actually
Oh, no, that's fine, but
Yeah.
there's another.
yeah, it'd be like here.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's not. I didn't go to. We have probably
Oh, okay.
like our full table would have like 20 different big categories, but I just wanted to hit the big ones,
Oh, okay.
so I didn't include. So yes, it is. You're right. That's actually exactly what it's called. So, but it's not included in this fees and fines. It's a different category. But who collects these ones? It's the city departments. These are basically our departmental receipts. Each department is responsible for getting these payments, getting these fees, these fines, also the related costs. They're responsible for generating and collecting these revenues. So that's what makes up the license, permit fees, and fines. It's it's one category, but it encompasses many, many different things. Utility users tax. This is 3 different taxes. Communications, which is the tax on phone bills. Electric tax, which is tax on that you pay DWP, through DWP for electricity, and gas users, you're paying through your gas bill. Generally, this tax source has been relatively flat. It's mostly based on use, and especially for communications usage is probably on the downward trajectory. People are cutting the cord and no longer using cable. And it's sort of a service generated, but cumulatively, I guess it should have been down there, huh? $652 million. The business tax everybody loves. It's a gross tax on businesses in the city. This is one that we're responsible for calculating with the Office of Finance. It's a tax, paid by all businesses that operate in the city based on their gross receipts. So how much they earn, they have to pay a portion to the city based on the type of business that they are. What is the date? When is it due? February 1st? And we tend to get everything in by maybe towards the end of May, beginning of June. So we calculate this for the budget, but it's not quite ripe yet when we do it. So we're doing our best to project without coming to full year.
Do you have a separate fund for the cannabis tax?
We do track that separately just because people are super interested in it, but it is essentially business tax. And there's also components of sales tax. We don't track that separately as much for business tax. We are tracking because there's so much focus on it. I think I might have the number in terms of change on the next slide. I don't have it off the top of my head the amount. What did we say for cannabis this year? I don't remember. It was $60 million or something. I don't remember. But a lot of the growth in business tax has been driven by cannabis, because it's the new business. Sales tax, we basically, talk to a bunch of economists and try to calculate how much we think we're going to get. It's really pretty economically sensitive, so we look at the growth rates that are anticipated for the next year, and a number of different independent economists do projections as to what they think that level is going to be. It's another big source of tax. Jumping down, the transient occupancy tax. This is the tax, the hotel tax. This is what visitors or Angelinos pay when they go stay in a hotel or an Airbnb now. So this says both the short-term rental taxes as well as the standard traditional hotel amounts. Power revenue transfer is power revenue transfer. Is favorite tax.
DWP.
My favorite.
Yeah, tax favorite. This is the amount of money that we get from DWP for their privilege of the return on the investment that we made as a city in that utility every year. Documentary transfer tax. This is the tax that is generated every time that you buy or you transfer a property from one person or one entity to another. You have to pay a tax based on the sale price. This is a highly volatile tax. It's based on the 2 components that cause generate the amount of tax we're going to get, the value of the properties being sold, and the number of properties being sold. The problem with this is that both of those things tend to rise and fall together. So, if the market is down, people aren't buying, and the people who are buying for less, and this thing goes over a cliff. So this is probably the most volatile tax that we have. Similarly, if things are going like gangbusters and the housing market is heated up, we can see this thing jump up a lot, generate a lot of additional revenues. And another one of everybody's, there's so many things that people love, but parking fines, is the fines that you pay when you park on your street during street sweeping or park in the red or let the meter lapse. That's $73, $124 million, $73 at a time. I always feel good when I get a parking ticket because I know that some portion of that is coming back to pay me. You probably don't have the same happiness that I do. But go ahead.
So it's still been declining even though the average ticket price for the various parking fines has gone up fairly astronomical. So the amount of tickets being given out,
The amount of tickets being given out, I'm not sure I'm not sure about the tickets have gone up, I don't know, I mean, the last several years, but I do know that this has consistently gone down as ticket issuance has gone down. It's also been a city policy to do more relaxed parking. We've changed, I think we're no longer issuing tickets after the street sweeper has gone through. So it used to be if the street sweeper from 8 to 10 and you're there at 9:55, you can get a ticket. We don't do that anymore. We only do it up to the point where the street sweeper has gone through, and then if you'll park on the street, it's okay. Yeah.
Some of this is outsourced to a third party is collecting that, so that'd be a net number, or that's before they get their chunk?
That
Which number is that?
hard to find. So, right, so we have we have a contractor who helps with part of the collections. My guess is that contract is paid separately, and this probably is a gross number, but I'm not 100% sure of that. It probably is something in the green book.
Would it be a schedule?
I don't think that would be described in the schedule. Maybe in the green book, in the discussion for parking fines, it would discuss whether it's citations. My guess is that we would just pay for that separately, just like we pay for the staff separately. It doesn't come out of the revenue, but I don't know if they get a cut or if we just pay them for their service. I'm not sure exactly how that works. Yeah.
May I make a suggestion?
Sure.
With regard to parking tickets?
Oh, yeah.
And other things? If you get a $75 parking ticket, and on it says, this ticket, you can pay for this ticket for $65 if you pay in the next 3 days. Then I think people would be more likely to pay it right away. You won't have to have people come after you and pay for that, tracking them down. So I think there should be an incentive
Yeah, really.
for,
Discount, yeah, discount.
for saying, pay it quickly.
Yeah.
And like with property taxes or something, if you pay
Right.
it before it's due, it's less, that sort of thing.
If you pay before it's due, they put it in another account and then it's a drag getting it back.
In Oregon, they have a thing where if you pay before it's due, it's less than it's due on the due date. And it's incentive to
Yeah.
just,
To get the money.
to get the
But they have
money,
to have two
get a
funds.
little bit less.
That makes too much sense.
Wait until you get that.
I'm actually not totally sure how we do on collections, so I don't know.
Give an incentive for the people to pay their
Yeah.
bills.
I think we do have the reverse incentive. I think that if it's late, we get to recharge them more. So
I
is
know,
that
and
doesn't count? That's not the same.
No, that's not the same.
That's a
It's
good
a
idea.
bad attitude.
That's a good idea.
You should be on the team that meets with the Department of Transportation. You can suggest that.
I would,
Yes. We can lobby that to you.
oh, and free buses in downtown.
Then you should be on that one. Yeah, check it out.
On the property tax, it's two components from what I gathered. One is the property tax, and then there's the property tax ex-CRA increment. What is the ex-CRA increment?
So when the Community Redevelopment Association were kind of decommissioned in the state, the way that had worked, this is not my expertise, but basically the state had allowed these districts to be established, and for any sort of growth in property tax in those areas, the CRAs, that organization could redevelop or reinvest that in that area to help with housing projects or economic development projects. They do different projects. When the state cut off the CRAs, that money essentially came back to the cities and local governments in the form of property tax. So we track that separately because people, I think, are probably still interested, at least for a while they were interested in what the impacts of those CRAs being dissolved was.
Are those 1290 funds, is that what they're called?
Oh, AB 1290, I feel like that's different from the AB 1290 funds because AB 1290 is partially dedicated, but then some of that may be in there. I'm not 100% sure. I probably should.
Okay, so that is not 1290.
Well, it may be because 1290 also is sort of, maybe it's a portion that is siphoned off to 1290. It's, I know there's...
A bunch of 1290 goes to the discretionary council.
Yeah, it goes to discretionary council funding, yeah. So it's, but I think that those are budgeted kind of in a separate place. It's not, there's not a line item in the budget for AB 1290 funds. So this may be the portion that comes to the city, and the 1290 may be kind of going directly into that.
Okay.
I'm not totally sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So as we're talking about revenue levels, this is a chart, because because we've had a lot of words. A little hard to, a lot going on in this chart, so let me kind of break it down piece by piece. This gray line here is the total amount of general fund taxes in billions of dollars. This is the amount. So the chart as a whole, let me start with that, is focusing on seven general fund taxes. So this is property tax, utility users tax, sales tax, business tax, and transient occupancy tax, documentary transfer tax, and probably the parking occupancy tax as well. So these are we call these our economically sensitive taxes. Remember this, because when we talk about the budget stabilization fund later, these are those same ones. We like to track these separately because these are the ones that show how the economy is doing. You know, license, permits, fees, and fines, which are really, driven by related costs, not so much sensitive to how the economy is doing. But this one is the one that kind of shows you what's happened in the past in the city when the economy has done well or poorly. This is kind of, if you looked at this and put it up against like a sort of the recessions that the city has had in the city, it would track against that. These are the ones that will change when the economy is not doing as well. So this is the full amount. We're close to $5.5 billion in these taxes. These are mostly general fund taxes. So out of the $6.6 billion, 5.5 of that is generated by these taxes, 5.3 or something. These bars.
Say that it's 5.3 out of how much?
Out of the 6.5.
Oh, of the general fund.
Out of the general fund,
Yeah,
This is
okay.
the general fund. So this is the gross amount on the gray. The bars here, this is the percent growth year over year. So the percent growth from the prior year. So, and the dark orange ones are sort of the actual amounts up until here, which is the budget amount. And these are our projections. This is what we expect it to be in the coming years. And so what you'll see, this is the average growth. This little dotted line shows you the average percent growth year over year. So it's an average percent of about 3%. So when we do our projections, we're basically just using historical averages. That's how we're making those estimates. And you'll see, like I said, we've had some good years, right? We've been kind of at, close to, or above average for these taxes for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 or 8 of the last 9 years, and always above 0. And then you'll see, we had about 5 years of growth here before we went down. We had about 5 years of growth here before it was kind of low. I mean, even like a year like this, it's positive, but the city's expenditures naturally grow by 3%. So if you're below the average, it means it's a hard budget year, right? This is a year that you're having cuts. This is a year you're having cuts. This is a period when you're gutting the city. Yeah.
How prepared do you think the city and its budget are if we were to endure another 5-year run like 08 to 12?
Ugh.
Right. So that's a great question. I would say that we're in better shape than we were here.
Really?
But-
It's really strong in the years before. I mean, like really, like way
Yeah.
stronger than what we have now.
So at this point, we probably had total reserves of maybe 2 or 3%. Now we're up close to 8.5%. So of our general fund budget. So could we withstand this without impacting services? Absolutely not. I mean, this is brutal. This was the worst downturn since the Great Depression, right? This everybody remembers what happened.
Josh, to give you an example, they do the 4-year budget outlook, and when it was like in fact 2010, the 4th year, given the natural progression of raises and stuff like that, the deficit was projected to be about $1 billion. So it was a horror show.
So it was a good point.
It
looks like it.
Yeah, so that was I think everybody around the country was obviously, around the world was suffering. So, but kind of my takeaway from this slide is always like, okay, yeah, down, whoa, how come we've been going like twice as long without having a downturn, right? I mean, it's been a steady and slow recovery. The city has been in relatively good shape, but it doesn't stay like this forever, right? This is going to happen, not this, but this is going to happen, or this is going to happen, sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Next year, I don't know. The year after that, I have no idea. If I knew that, I would be in some other industry. But I do know that when it happens, it's going to be a tough year. So it's just important to kind of know that that's an issue. And so it's important for us to be fiscally responsible so we can prepare for that. Yeah.
Wouldn't it make a certain sense then, if you're seeing like a trend of many years that are positive in a row, that for your 4-year outlook, you may want to put it lower than the average, knowing that the law of averages is likely that one of those 4 years probably going to see, maybe not what we had in 10, but maybe like that little negative from 02 or something,
Yeah.
just so that if it does end up being close to average, well then that's bonus money that just showed up essentially.
Yeah.
But that way, you know, like fiscally, we're more attuned to something that could be coming in negative. Is that something that?
Yeah, so the way we look at it is the average includes all the bad years, right?
We're
And so
right,
for
I
us, it's
get
yeah.
that. But I'm saying like, so right now, you have the projections for the next 4 years at just a tiny bit under. It looks like it's at 3 and the average is like 3.1.
Yeah,
Wouldn't it make sense to think like, what if we put it at 2.5?
yeah,
And then that way, if you actually do get 3 like normal, it's like, okay, things are much rosier than we projected, but we're a lot closer to being ready in case something turns foul on us and we're not having to cut like deep into bone or something.
yeah. So when we get to outlook, I'll talk about that in more detail, but let me just respond to that right now and just say that the assumptions that we make are, we do our best to kind of limit it to things that we can point to some reason for thinking that, right? And just sort of a knowledge that at some point it's going to turn south doesn't make me, that is not really justification for putting a 0% 2 years out, right? So the only thing that we have, because we don't have like complicated models that are projecting revenues, we're just kind of, our best estimate is really just historical averages. That's sort of the level of, we haven't built sort of models to predict recessions. Again, like I said, if I do that, I'd be doing that. PhD or something like that, but I definitely do not. So that's kind of why we do that. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and we could have said that here, and then we would have been wrong all those years. I mean, it's sort of like, how do we don't know when it's going to turn south. I just know that at some point it's going to be a hard budget year. Yeah.
One of the things, Josh, if you look at the 4-year outlook, the CAO tends to be conservative in their projections for all the obvious reasons. As they show a lot of money, that means all the guys, boys and girls downstairs are going to want more. So if you look at the outlook for last year, they showed an increase of 2.7%. It was actually 6%. So you have a little bit of extra slush there, but it's basically to try and control the spending. At least that's from my perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we're trying to, we basically in the outlook we're doing what we know, right? We're not trying to say it's going to be a great year or a bad year. We just are putting out there what we think that we can actually justify, and we don't have a great ability to make those projections. So we're conservative.
Are you going to talk about this in the reserve fund or the budget stabilization fund?
I'm gonna. It's important to. That's why I want to kind of point this out, that people remember that these are the revenues that we use in calculating the budget stabilization fund. And when I get there, I'll mention them again, but I'm not going to talk about them in great detail. So if you want to talk more about these taxes this week, probably the right time to. Yeah. So because these are the same ones.
Josh, Jacob, I have a question. In 2001, why is it so high? Why is the bar so high? Seems to be the highest.
That is the highest.
2001, what happened?
.com? Is that .com bubble?
That's still .com, people paying taxes from 2000 before the economy totally tanked out.
Tanked.
Yeah. I mean, it could be, so that definitely could be part of it. But if you look like, for example, this year, this seems like a little bit out of place also, right? Because we have these two are more similar, this one's a little bit higher. No, actually, it could be that one thing happened, right? At some point, we had the triple flip and then we unwound the triple flip, where the state, I don't know how to describe it, basically traded our sales tax for their property tax for this, and we had all these changes, and then so that the state kind of took the local government's money in the early 2000s, but promised to give us the money back. And we kind of had 1 year where, we got like double paid, right? And so we had to jump, right? It's one-time money. This isn't necessarily reflecting ongoing money. It's a little, so that's why it's economically sensitive. But when we look at actually for the budget stabilization fund, we actually try to control for some of those one-time things. But some of these big years and some of these small years, like there, that actually could have been what the triple flip did to hurt us. And maybe the year wasn't that bad. So there could be some one-time things that are also causing some of these aberration years. I started my city career here, but I don't know what that was, so.
Well, now part of that would have been that in 99 and 2000, the real estate market came back and was expanding and going up in price. So we had the real estate market tanked,
Yeah.
and then
Came back up again.
it came back up.
Yeah, and I know this was actually, I remember this year, and I think that a lot of that was real estate that was driving that. I think it was documentary transfer tax that drove probably a lot of that jump. So it could be something going, like you said. I mean, there is a story behind each one of these years. I don't know all the stories. I don't know all the stories. But there's a story. Everything has a story. So all these are great questions. I wish I could tell you the stories, but yeah, for all of them. So anyway, so this is kind of giving you a sense of growth and how it relates to the economy. If we move on to the next slide, this is looking back at this year's budget and what we changed from last year to this year in revenue, what drove the $380 million or 6.1% growth. Like, where do we get all that money from? I'll walk through how we got that money. Obviously, we have the money this year. It may not be that as interesting to you as what's going to happen next year, but I hope that as we go through this, you kind of get a sense of what types of things you might want to look for as you're thinking about what kind of year you think it's going to be in terms of revenue. And really what's driving it just generally is, we've had a pretty strong economy. And growth can slow in either one of two ways. We can either economy can slow down, that can hurt our revenues, or it's also possible that there's policy changes. Policy changes can make our revenue go up, policy changes can make our revenues go down. And this chart also helps to explain how that can happen. So let me just go through them. Yeah.
So there was, I'm not sure when the law changed that if somebody sells their house, they can transfer the basis. Is that for property tax?
That's a Prop 60, Prop 90.
Yeah.
That's fair.
What kind of effect does that have? Or is that just a limited amount, just seniors can do that, or do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Yeah,
But
I think
wait.
that failed.
Basically, you're talking about
Yeah.
issues of
Can't
Prop 13.
transfer.
Yes.
And Prop 13 allowed, I think the subsequent one is what?
Well, because Prop 60 and Prop 90 allowed so Prop 13 allowed for the property tax to remain at a certain level,
Right.
unless there was a change in transferring title by a sale of the property. Prop 60 and Prop 90 allowed for select individuals who owned the property at a certain age and had the property to buy another property of an equal or lesser value and transfer that same property tax amount to that new property.
Okay, so it's just a limited amount.
It's a different
Okay.
thing, yeah.
And was
that
it just
didn't
like one
pass.
time?
No, Prop 5, which
This
was
one
on
does
the
go.
which was on the ballot in 2018,
Last year.
failed. But that was to expand Prop 60, Prop 90 limitations.
Oh, okay.
So you have the same effect when someone uses, say, parent-grandchild.
Oh, for
That's,
I mean,
Generation.
that's not,
If-
is that
if-
a
if-
as
part of
gifting the
budget?
property.
if you
as
give
a-
the property to a relative, it keeps its basis.
Yeah.
And it also applies to states. So, for example, if I could rent out my property and still keep my basis, but they're going to be going after that. If I give it to my kid, the kid keeps my basis.
Then you can always keep it in trust or under an LLC and then just have the, there are many ways around that, but that's different. I'm not a tax advisor. I cannot give any financial advice.
So Prop 13
Oh, good
certainly
one,
has a
Craig.
huge impact. I mean, property tax is actually, it's actually a very stable source of taxes for us. So it's actually kind of a great cornerstone in terms of running an entity because it takes a while for the impacts of a recession or a boom to hit. So in these kind of good times when people are selling things, property taxes are going up, we're still getting 6% growth, which is not an extreme. It's high, but it's not like driving. It's sort of an unsustainable amount for this.
If you look at the property markets, the average, back in the recession, some of the average prices dropped a third. So if all of a sudden you had a grand list or assessed value of $500 billion and it dropped a third, you're going to lose $160 billion, and that's going to be $1.6 billion of revenues. Whereas, if everybody, so you didn't have to go reassess everything, because my house, which was on the market, which may have been worth, I bought for 100, that's worth $1 million, is now worth 667, I don't get reappraised. But you have a stability, you know, in there, a cornerstone, as Jacob called it. So it's a nice, steady source of revenues that is not as volatile as the other economically sensitive revenues, the other 6 economically sensitive.
Definitely a trailing, you know, so we'll be good. It's a good kind of thing to hang our hat on for a little while as the economy falls. At least we have this big property tax. Maybe it goes down to a lower growth rate, but we're not, it's not going to get negative in 1 year. That's true.
Yeah.
Oh, can we stay on the thank you?
Oh, I saw the hand move and I was like,
Oh no, that was not. Sorry, I was just hoping that I didn't jinx myself and get a negative property tax. That would be really bad. So we have $154 million increase in property tax, which is 6% growth. Like I said, that comes from the county on what their assessed valuation is for the next year. License permits, fees, and fines. We had nearly $100 million of growth, and so a lot of this is from increases in special fund reimbursements. You know, those related costs that I talked about. But also, there's things in there that are not, you know, the increase of the reimbursements that we're getting from MPA because the police department is working and is providing services to MPA now. That contract amount goes up, we get more money back. It's not really more revenue for the city because we can't spend it on anything. It has to go back and be used. The amount that we're putting out to pay for that service. So some of that growth isn't necessarily free money, even though it is, you know, general fund and theoretically unrestricted. Electric users tax had a big bump. This is based on DWP's estimates. We adjust those estimates. UP gives us a number of how much tax they think they're going to collect. It's basically driven by the use of electricity, their anticipated use of electricity in the next year. But they give us a full amount that they plan to charge. We always drop that down a little bit because they actually only collect, I forget, 98, 99%. We make a slight adjustment to that. Communication users tax, I mentioned this before. This one actually went down because every time somebody decides that all they're going to do is get Netflix and HBO Go and listen to YouTube, and they cut their cord, then you know, the tax goes down. There's less money collected on cable. So that's going to continue to go down as the telecommunications market changes. Sales tax went up. It's 3.6% growth that we're anticipating. Slight increase from cannabis, and also a slight increase from a decision that is going to help us get taxes from out-of-state e-sales. Yeah.
I'm noticing you have cannabis in 2 different line items
Yes.
there.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between the 2?
So sales tax is the amount that you pay at the register.
Okay, so the customer, the end user is paying.
Yeah, and the business tax is the amount that the business is going to be paying. So that's their gross receipts tax. So if they generate $100,000, they have to pay 5% of that to the city through the business tax. So most of it comes into business tax.
How
Yeah,
do they deal with that? Because they can't put it in their bank or anything. What happens?
yeah, they bring us cash.
And it sits someplace in a little like bucket.
We're increasing the security of the city hall in order to
You aren't
be able
saying
to.
where it's being kept because you don't want to get
Well, I
robbed.
don't want to know exactly what, I'm just saying.
No,
how
it's
do
in the
you deal
budget.
with
I mean,
it?
it's transparent. We have, it's an issue. It's an issue that we're deeply concerned about. And we put in, Office of Finance got more money, and police is going to be more attentive. And we spread out the collection over a broader period of time, so you don't have everybody, like the first year, there were people in line
On
right
February
on
20th.
Main Street,
Wow.
like with literally bags.
Oh my God.
That we realized that was not.
No.
yeah.
No, they get robbed real easy.
Yeah, so what we've actually done, if I could just finish up, so we've made the collections, I think initially quarterly, and it's gonna be monthly. And so some of those one-time revenue increases is because whereas business tax used to lag for 3 or 4 months, now because you're doing it monthly, it's only lagging for 1 month, and so we're kind of moving up those revenues a little bit.
But it can
So
only
we're,
be used for certain things because you have to, things you paid for with cash.
well, no, we can deposit it, but
Oh,
they
they
can't
can't.
deposit it. Right, so we're banked. City has
Oh,
banked.
that's what I mean, I thought.
Yeah, so we get it, we can, we try to deliver it as soon as we possibly can to a safe, and we just put it in with our rest of our money and collect interest.
Okay, you can put
Yeah,
it in the bank, they
Yes,
can't.
they cannot.
Okay.
yeah. Legal tender for all debit.
Remember, Fed said
That's all right.
no.
So Where is, so obviously we know that there are tons of cannabis businesses that don't pay their taxes. I believe that it's more than half, if I remember correctly. I know that, because I'm looking in the fire department, I know they're involved in like dealing with some of the collections on those monies. Do you have any idea how much that could, because I would have figured it would have made this list, seeing as how it's like half of the stores, and I'm just curious why that's not a bigger fund of money.
Well, that's actually.
Yeah, not the not paying taxes.
I will, actually, the next slide, I'll talk about this a little bit, but no, it's fine. But just to say now that there's a lot of uncertainty in our minds about how much we're gonna collect with cannabis because it is a new tax source, and we don't know how much is, of what we could be collecting is being collected, and we don't know what the impact is gonna be of cracking down on illegal cannabis dispensaries, right? We don't know, because some of them may actually be paying taxes even if they're not legally operating. So we don't know, what those impacts are going to be. So there's a lot of uncertainty about that amount, and there's a lot of debate. And it was one of the most hotly discussed items as we were trying to nail down a number. So I think I'm not sure that I would necessarily. I can't say yes, you're right, and this is the amount. My answer is we don't really know, and over time we'll get better at that.
It's still unclear.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Why is it that 14.2 million is one time?
Right, so the one time is really from that change in timing. So it actually the one time is actually on both sides. We have some delayed receipts from 1819 that we'll be collecting in 1920 that we had, because, it's just basically timing of the collections. And we're also getting some additional receipts in 1920 that are because we're making them pay more and more frequently. So most people pay their business taxes once a year. I think they're not paying 12 times a year, maybe 4 times, I don't remember exactly, but they're paying more, which means that we're gonna get sort of the payments.
Because they
And
can.
instead of getting 3/4 of it in a year, we're gonna get 11, 12, 7. So that only happens once, and then it will have sort of a consistent amount on an ongoing basis. So it's really just a timing issue. TOT, so cannabis is an example of a tax that can be impacted heavily by the policies that we pursue as a city. So if we crack down, we actually might hurt this revenue source, or we might help this revenue source. Who knows? I mean, it could be that if you crack down and close all the illegal businesses, then all the ones that are legal are going to start generating a lot more revenues, and we could have a much higher. So we sort of, it's a balancing act. We don't know what's going to happen, but the policies are going to impact that revenue source, and they're also going to impact this year the transit occupancy tax, because we've been having a lot of growth from short-term rentals, but because there's a new policy that went into effect this year, which requires all the short-term rentals, the owners or the hosts or whatever you want to call them, to register their property. It limits the amount of days that they can be used. It limits the properties that can be used for short-term rentals. So we suspect that this is going to slow down that level of revenues. I mean, it's maybe the neighborhoods are happier that there's fewer people kind of staying in their neighbor's back house, but from our perspective, we're going to get less money. That means less money to spend. So, but again, there's uncertainty with this. So these are both good examples of how sort of the policies that we adopt are going to impact what our revenues are going to look like. Doc transfer, we already talked about the two different components to it. We consider this to be like a canary in the coal mine. This is like the first economically sensitive tax that's going to be impacted when the recession happens, because we expect that the housing market will be one of the early things to crash. And like I said, when this one crashes, it crashes hard. So -2.6, it's not ideal, it seems flat. So yeah.
What are some of the other canary in the coal mine things that you guys tend to look at like that for when you're trying to see like when a turn is coming about?
Right, so this would be the first. I think sales tax and business tax are also going to be sensitive. Okay. This is what people are buying, so that's obviously something. Consumer confidence is definitely an impact. These ones are probably pretty stable. Transient occupancy tax is another one because our people are still traveling. Our people not coming to, so probably, this side here is where you're going to see, parking fines is always going down, but so that we got scanned, but it doesn't indicate anything other than like part. Or
Also,
not.
the tariff issue might affect the sales tax, because we're not getting the exports from other countries that we normally got.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, you know, what the Trump session is going to do. I mean, if we, I mean, if we're slowing down the economy, if we're, then any one of these things could be impacted. If we're, you know, so we'll see. But I would say that sales, business, DOT, dock transfer, are probably, just looking at it, the four that will be most dramatically impacted in the first ones. And then property tax would trail. I mean, in that 5-year recession started to slow down, but it's not going to happen. Trail. So, thank you. Okay. Okay. So these are some of the caveats and estimate limitations that we've made this for the 1920 budget. As we went through, we always kind of talk about the, you know, we say here's the budget, but this is why we don't like it. That's kind of our job. You know, people always get annoyed. Council, you know, you make these recommendations and you turn around and saying, you know, why they're wrong. We're like, well, whatever, we do our best. So obviously we talked about cannabis already. So cannabis receipts, we just don't have a lot of historical data. We haven't really had a full year under the current regime with the level of enforcement that we're going to have this year, which is going to go way up from prior years. We just don't know. It's really difficult to predict. So there could be a lot of change this year, or it could be next year that we see the change. It could be up. You know, we just don't know. Short-term rentals, you know, that new policy went into effect this summer. We just don't know yet. You know, we'll be able to track it this year and I can get a sense, and we'll make a much better estimate, I think, next year. But for the 1920 budget, it definitely is a risk, just like cannabis is. And then this is actually not a general fund tax. You know, the gas tax is a special fund. This is remitted to us from the state. It's an incredibly complicated formula that they use. I think there's about 6 different buckets of gas tax, and you know, maybe 4 or 5 of them are like predictable, and then the other one just appears to us to be utterly random. It's just like goes up and down month to month, and we don't know how as we talk to them and they don't give us the straight answer. So we've had a hard time actually calculating gas tax, and last year we had to make some adjustments and bring down, you know, withdraw some funds from some projects because we just didn't get what we thought we were going to get. So it's always like a little bit of an uncertainty, and it seems to have been slowing down in the last few years, you know, beyond what we had expected. So that's the revenue side. It's 8:21. I'm going to talk about expenditures when we get some water. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about revenues before we move on to the expenditure side?
Yeah, not knowing your gas tax numbers, that doesn't make sense to me.
Are you still holding?
It's a well-established business, like how are...
Well, not all components of the gas tax are generated by usage. So it's not, so the money comes in based on a specific amount, you know, per gallon that's sold, right? And then it goes to the state. And the state goes through this calculation in which they parse out those funds based on, like, I think it's 6 different categories or 5. There's a number of different categories of how they determine which jurisdictions are going to get that. And some of them are predictable, and some of them are consistent, and we can sort of look at those numbers and see trends and, you know, make estimates based on what's happening with, you know, how much people are going to be driving. Is the economy going well? People are driving a lot. Is it down? Therefore, it's going down. Our gas price is down. We can kind of make those, but there's a category, maybe 2, that are very, very volatile, and we don't really know how they're sort of distributing that. And, you know, maybe it has to do with, you know, reimbursements or true-ups or something that's going on that they're not really explaining to us very well. So we've had a couple years where during the course of the year, the estimates that they gave us in the beginning of the year were different than the money that they gave us during that year. So we work with the state, they say, this is how much we think you're gonna get. We look at it, we're like, okay. And then, like, you know, around January, we're like, dude, how come we're getting like 10 million less than we thought we were gonna get? And then they're like, eh. And then by May, we gotta bring it down, you know? So it's just sort of, that's just kind of how it goes with gas tax. Yeah.
So the difference between the 5.3 and the 6.6 general fund budget is basically that $1.3 billion of reimbursements, those line items you were talking about?
That's a great question, and let me answer that unless anybody else has anything else on revenues before I go on, and then, yeah, go ahead.
Does the gas include the oil and gas wells that are in?
No, that's a
city?
different source of revenues. That one is low and easier to predict. It's just kind of, we're no longer the gas juggernaut that we once were in the city. But thank goodness for all of us who don't want to live near oil wells. I think the ground is dry beneath us. I don't know. I'm not a petroleum expert.
Not really. They just don't have as many wells.
Okay, well, that's.
So it's license fees, and that's the biggie. that-
Yeah, so, yes, so moving on to revenues, expenditures, I want to talk about sort of, one overview is how much of our,
Downtown City Back. I'm sorry.
that's okay. So this chart kind of tells us how much of our unrestricted revenue. So I talked about the general fund as being unrestricted, right? So the $6.6 billion budget is general fund, it's unrestricted, there's discretion how we spend it. But like you just said, Jack, not every dollar of that general fund, some of it has to be dedicated for certain things. There's some fees that we get in that actually are general fund revenues, and they have to be used to pay for that service, because if we collect a fee, it has to go for the service. So part of that comes down from the fees. Also, there's some grants that come in as general fund revenue. Most of it, like I said, comes in as, sort of maybe off budget, that full big number. But there are some programs that are funded through grants, and we kind of receive them as general fund. Maybe they're smaller, so those ones are obviously restricted. Like you said, Jack, reimbursements for services, those certainly would be restricted, or there may be some special funds. So if you look at the actual amount every year that the mayor and council can spend, that they kind of don't have their hands tied, it's $5.3 billion, which seems like a ton of money. I mean, it's good. It's not the full 6.6, but $5.3 billion. I think we'd all do pretty good if we could spend $5.3 billion in a year.
Spends fast in the city.
What's that?
Spends fast in the
It
city.
does spend fast in the city. And when you look at it, everybody's top priority is public safety. So what do you know? We spend about 70% of our money, of this unrestricted money, it goes directly to fire and police. So the biggest chunk to police, and then fire 16%, 52% to police. Our unrestricted money mostly goes, 62% of it goes to fire and police. And then the rest goes for everything else. The library, rec and parks, which are dedicated, but we'll call it unrestricted for now. City attorney gets money. All the public works, street services, sanitation, all these different departments, that's how much, 8.7% is all they get from this unrestricted money. So what does this mean? When I look at this chart, well, what this means is that, when we have a downturn in the economy, right, nobody wants to touch police and fire, because that's the most important stuff, that's the most important thing that the city does. So if you have a 5% loss in downturn in revenues, if you lose just 5%, if you're down just a little bit, and you don't want to touch this, then you're going to have to take a lot more out of this part, right? And so a lot of times when people are noticing that cities during hard times, the city services seem to be disproportionately impacted for the size of the decrease. Like, why is it that Dunn used to have 40 people and now they have 20 or whatever the numbers are?
63.
60, you said 63 and now it's less than 63? Because
A lot less.
that's where the cuts are gonna come. CO down 30%. I mean, all these departments, this is where the cuts are gonna come
I think it went from 63 to 18.
for a minute, I think you're right. And then part of this stuff is handled by the clerk, but yes, it's a big change from where it was when the department was kind of, was hitting on all cylinders. And that's what's gonna happen, because the priorities are police and fire, is public safety. That's what the public's asking for. Nobody's, but you have to look at this in tough times, what are you gonna do? You're gonna gut all city services, you're gonna sort of hit everywhere. You have to kind of think about that as a budget advocate, as somebody who's involved in budget policy, because like where are our priorities? I mean, if you just want to say police is my number one priority, it shouldn't get cut, then you're basically consigning the rest of the city to really take it anyway.
Yeah, so this gets me back to revenues for a second. If the cuts basically only are coming out of the 30%. And if, you know, like you said, if we want to take 5% out of 30, that's like now 1/6 of it.
Yeah.
Is the city thinking about like new and different forms of revenues, like going forward, to help mitigate some of these issues?
Yes, actually, we have a financial policy, which I'll talk about at some point, but maybe not tonight. That is that the city should seek diverse and new revenue sources. And, you know, because of the generosity of city voters, you know, we've been able to add a lot of resources for services that are important enough for people to vote for taxing themselves for them. So, you know, state, we have money for roads and streets, there's money for homelessness services countywide and homeless facilities that you voted for within the city. So we're always looking for opportunities to kind of add taxes. Mostly when we do it, we try to do it for a dedicated source that we think is important to people, because it seems like if you give a general tax, people are less supportive of that. We haven't had the same amount of luck. Say, oh, how is some unrestricted money? Like, how about you tell us what you're going to spend it on? Which is reasonable. I mean, we need to be accountable for what we're going to be doing, and we need to be able to answer for it. So but we do definitely aggressively seek revenues. You know, there's a lot of constraints in the state, because every increase in a tax, you have to go before the voters. You know, we have added, we've tried to get full cost recovery on fees. For example, when I first got to the city, I believe that the trash fee was about 1/3 of the actual cost of collecting trash in the city, and now it's full cost recovery. It was a decision that was made by Mayor Villaraigosa to kind of charge, and you know, honestly, well, honestly, I think it's honest. I mean, I believe that was a good decision, because what it was before is the general fund was paying for the people who are having their garbage collected. Who's getting their garbage collected? Homeowners. It's not going to apartments. So the 60 or whatever, the part of the city that can afford to buy their own home, you know, they're basically getting subsidy from the other people who can. To me, that's upside down. But it's a decision that, you know, that we could actually do without having to go to the voters, because it was a fee. So we do look for opportunities for full cost recovery as another source of revenues. You know, and a lot of this actually, I think, I've always been interested, I may say this every year, but I've always been interested in to think, you know, how much of this is as a result of Prop 13, for better maybe, or for worse. It used to be, I've been told, because I wasn't here, in the 70s and maybe before, the city council, the mayor would devise a budget, they'd see how much it was, and then they would just raise property taxes to pay for it. You know, people don't like that.
They did.
Kind of makes sense. So they put this cap on property taxes and made it so that it can't really grow. So what are we doing? Well, we're charging you for every little thing that you do. We're charging you for all the services that you're getting, for which there's a specific group of people who are getting that service. We're charging fees, legal fees. But you know, if it's not going to everybody equally, then we try to assess a fee. And so people, you know, think we're, oh, you're nickel and diming, I got to pay for everything that I get, and but it's all connected, right? This is sort of, it's all connected. I'm sure we can have a debate how Jack can see clamping down.
I know you have a lot of material to go through. The garbage fee went from $11 to $36.11.
Yeah.
Which is a
Over
lot.
about a 2-year period. I mean, it's going to be
triple.
phased in.
Like I said, it's triple.
And, you know, I could argue that it should have been a general fund expense, because that's a,
Split
you know,
things up.
public service.
Sure.
But, you know,
We do all the work.
Villaraigosa put it in, and, you know, it was going to go in over 4 years, and I think he put it over 2.
We did that. Yeah. So we can debate it.
That was all Jacob's fault.
I was rooting for it, but I didn't.
Yeah, you were new, you didn't know what was going on.
Like I said, I should stop saying honestly. I do believe that it was the right policy, but I understand that we don't always hear everything. That's what makes it good to live in a democracy. Yeah.
So full cost recovery means that when we pay a fee for that service, and out of that fee, we're also paying for the workers or the service
Yes.
providers.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
okay.
yeah, you're paying for everything that goes into providing that service. And it could, not only the workers, you know, you're paying.
It kind of includes two things when you talk about full
A
cost.
whole bit.
One is they determine what the cost is by fully allocating various things. So let's say the garbage guy comes around. Well, you know, and you pay him $10 an hour just for argument's sake. Well, it costs $30 an hour when you start saying, well, you know, got to pay for the truck, you gotta pay for the pensions, you gotta pay for, and so they're gonna
Fuel.
do, you gotta pay for Jacob, you gotta pay for the mayor. So they're gonna do full cost, full cost, and then they're gonna ask you to pay the full cost to reimburse the city. So-
Yes, that's right. That's exactly what we call full cost.
Oh, okay.
So all the costs associated with it,
The
all
only,
the
the
costs.
only downside is when there's a holiday and or a problem, we get charged, but we don't get the service, and that's what we get.
Yes, you do.
Yes, you get the service just
You
like.
get it the next day.
We're supposed to, but I can cite many a time we didn't get it at all.
Yeah, we
So
want
it just
Call sanitation,
depends.
I found them to be responsive, and I call it sanitation, but you just call them, they don't come.
Oh, yeah, well, my husband
Now-
did that, because
Now
he was
you
a little
can get a
upset.
bulky item pickup anytime you want. You
Yeah.
It's no longer limited
Oh.
to twice a year.
Yeah, it's so much
Well,
better.
it
My-
may take
Yeah.
a month
So much
or
better.
two for them to come get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we have people dumping furniture, we have a little center divider
Oh.
on Zataqua, and we have people dumping bulky items in there because they don't get picked up. And it's frustrating because I live right behind it,
Yeah.
so
No,
it's,
I mean, it's
you
true, a
know,
lot of
we're
stuff
like-
ends up in alleys and
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's dropped off by apartment people who don't have the benefit of the bulk item program.
Oh, yeah, people do that all the time, and North Hollywood was really notorious for having their alleys all blocked with garbage. They didn't do that as much in Van Nuys, but they definitely had a problem with bulky items in front of my place.
Sanitation is full cost recovery.
Sanitation, yeah, both
Yeah.
on the sewer side and also the solid side. So they are, your sewer
Sewer
fees,
side? Okay.
yeah, your sewer, you pay your sewer bill through your DWP bill,
DWP, yeah.
of your water
It's broken down.
bill. That covers all the costs of the sanitation program, everything. I mean, not just salaries, but also the infrastructure that you're paying for, the replacements of the sewer pipes, everything that they
Which
pay
haven't
for on
been
that
done in
side.
50 or 60 years.
Yeah, well, and then on the solid side, which is the garbage, if you're a homeowner that's picked up in your green, black,
Green, blue, and
blue,
black.
and maybe you have a brown, if you have a horse.
Of course.
In those bins, that's paid for through the solid waste program. Both of those programs are run by sanitation. It's a huge program. That pays for all the trucks and all the bins when they break and the employees.
Loser.
So, okay, yeah, let's move on. So this is kind of a summary of some of the key investments that are made in the 1920 budget. This is where kind of the big ticket items or the high profile items went. Again, this is for this year's budget. I know you're thinking about next year's budget, but some of the hot items remain hot, and also it gives you a sense of where the priorities have been for the mayor and council. Obviously, homelessness has been a major focus for several years. This year, we actually didn't increase it as much as we had in the past years. It's only a $3 million increase from the general fund, but it's still over $100 million in funding. Just want to say that 3 or 4 years ago, we were paying about $15 million a year for homeless services. And it had been that way for many, many years. All we basically did was put money towards LAHSA, and that was kind of the end of it. Although I know everybody knows what's happening in the streets and how the homelessness crisis has gone up, funding has gone up tremendously in that same period of time. So it just shows how challenging that issue is. A lot of this money is going towards the bridge home sites, which are the temporary shelters. That's an increase of $10 million. $31 million of the general fund is going for cleanup. That's a big chunk of the increase, or a big chunk of the amount that's spent on homelessness. And the police overtime also went up to support those cleanups and also to provide security around the bridge home sites reopening this year. There's also a huge chunk of money that we are anticipating issuing and spending this year for the affordable housing projects through the bond measure, HHH bond, which is the bond in which voters voted for that's going to be paying for mostly affordable housing, but also for homelessness facilities. That's a $1.2 billion bond issue. We're expecting to be able to use about $281 million of that in this year's budget. Projects obviously take a while to get going, that's why you're not seeing the buildings pop up, but the money is being spent. In fact, in the last month or so, all $1.2 billion has been programmed. So every dime of that money at this point, we think we know what we're going to spend it on. Obviously, things will change. But at this point, everything is dedicated for projects that have been approved and are going forward. Yeah.
Homelessness is an emergency, and that suggests that things would pick up the pace, that they'd act more quickly
Yes.
because of the emergency. Is it taking so long to build bridge housing because of lack of money, or why is it not happening like like a response to an emergency?
So the bridge housing sites, bridge home sites are definitely going for city pace in an expedited manner. And I sit there at the mayor's office. They have this kind of board where they list by district all the different projects and what stage they're in, and you see that they are making progress. But there, you got to identify. It's the city is crowded. You got to identify it as a site that's flat and available, and
No, I'm talking about, there is a site,
yeah.
it's just not happening. I'll talk to
Yeah.
you offline.
No, it's fine. I think,
But
I mean,
just-
the
but
plan is, yeah.
emergency seems to
I know.
suggest that we should act as if it were emergency instead of saying, okay, 3 years later, we still don't have it,
Yeah. No, so I think that most of the money came in last year and this year. I think the plan is that a lot of those facilities will come online during this fiscal year. I can't tell you whether or not that's going to be true in June or not, but I do know that's the plan. So it's not that easy just to cite them. It's been a challenge if you know what's going on in neighborhoods when the neighborhood gets picked as the location. It's not always a positive. So there's a process.
They have to be city sites.
Yeah, a lot of them are city sites. Yeah, city sites makes it a lot easier. Yeah.
Am I getting confused between bridge homes and affordable housing though?
Yeah, so Bridge Home
Yes.
is the temporary shelters. I think we're trying to do about 20 different Bridge Home facilities between 50 and 150 beds. It's transitional housing. It's not permanent housing.
Okay.
The HHH projects, some of those are for homelessness facilities, service facilities, but the vast majority is for permanent affordable housing, permanent supportive affordable, I forget the order of the words, but housing for people who are currently homeless. They can move into it, have supportive services nearby, and they can stay there indefinitely, right? It's sort of permanent housing.
Is there a connection between the two?
Well, yes. Yes, I mean, I guess you could have somebody transition from a bridge housing into a new,
From bridge.
That's the idea.
But I think the philosophy for both of them is that the best thing to do for somebody who's living on the streets is to get them off the street.
Right.
So, we know that it's
Why
going to
bridge?
take a few extra years to get, multi-unit supportive housing
Affordable
things
housing,
built.
gotcha.
We can do bridge faster. Maybe not fast enough, but we can do bridge home facilities faster. So,
Tracy, one of the issues is when they did the bond, it was for $1.2 billion. When they drafted the ordinance, the DO put in a little bit for affordable housing, as opposed, that's different than permanent supportive housing. I think maybe affordable housing as defined is maybe 20% or 25%. So,
but yeah, it's all.
Poverty level is not homeless.
Which city departments are the main ones dealing with the homelessness? Because we don't really have like a department of homelessness or anything.
Right, yeah, no, so the city's homeless coordinator is actually housed in the CEO's office.
Okay.
who's that?
Meg Barkley.
Meg what?
Meg Barkley,
Okay.
Barkley.
yeah.
That's the one.
So she, but, we play a coordinating role, so many different city departments. If you look at the homelessness budget in the back of the white book, you'll see how many different departments have some hand in some
Back of the
different
white
parts.
book.
Yeah, the back of the homelessness budget, you'll see all the different departments that are involved. And a lot of them are spending more than we are. And certainly the projects, we don't build and CEOs up. So it's all over the place. We're really the contract with LASA is managed by housing department. So there's a lot of coordination. It's really across Department of Offer.
Sure.
Also built the DOU.
BOE is working on those buildings, coordinating any city buildings that happen. So homelessness is a big expenditure, one of our key investments. Infrastructure, this year we added funds, with the help of some of the special funds that have been, approved. Measure M, which is relatively new, we were able to increase because we got a full year funding for street projects and alleys. We have a big increase in stormwater for the first time in many years because of Measure W, the water measure, which is going to allow us to do more stormwater and water quality projects than we've been able to do in a long time. That's been underfunded. We've had a hard time addressing stormwater issues. And also just general fund, we're putting $73 million of general fund towards infrastructure projects for sidewalks and streets and facilities. Last year we were at 100 million, so it's actually gone down. Part of it is being offset because we've been able to have these increases in special funds because of new and increased special funds, street damage restoration fund, as well as these. So we're able to, the reduction in general fund doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing less for infrastructure. And then, as always, funds go towards public safety. We were able to increase police overtime by $47 million. We've been underfunding police overtime. It was this year we had to put a huge amount of money towards police overtime during the fiscal year. We don't like doing that because it means you got to find other places to cut, possibly, or get good revenue if you're going to be able to fund something. So we like to budget the amount that we're expecting. We think this year we're doing that for the first time in a while. Also put money towards police technology. $2 million to reopen the Harbor Jail. Anybody here from Pedro? Nope, nobody's happy about that. Some money for fire for fast response vehicles, and also ITA got $3.2 million for radio infrastructure. So it's a combination of technology and services. So can't talk about expenditures without talking about, yes?
Back on, excuse me, back on the other screen, for sidewalk repair, it's gone down, but there was a major lawsuit that the city's obligated over the next 30 years to repair sidewalks, and if you're disabled, you're at the top of the list. So have they spread it out so long that it just goes down anyway, or are they finding some way? I mean, how are they going to pay for their obligation?
Yes. So we do have an obligation, and I think the current amount is around $31 million that we have to spend every year on sidewalks.
Mm-hmm.
That settlement doesn't require that we spend any particular funding source. So the $15 million, is that what it is? I think it's around $15 million that we're spending in general fund for sidewalks this year. Is actually, we have a lot of other sources of funds that are also going towards sidewalks. So we actually are spending, I think in total, a little over $40 million for sidewalks in next year's budget, which is similar to what we did last year, and is actually $10 million above the required level pursuant to that settlement. So we're actually budgeting above what we've done for the last couple of years. So it doesn't necessarily show up as general fund, which is kind of sometimes the focus of these types of charts when I do them. But we are meeting that obligation, which is an input obligation, the amount that we spend, and we are meeting that through a combination of general fund and special funds. Yeah.
And while we're on this slide, does the fire fast response vehicles, does that include the firemen as well as the vehicle, or is
Yes, I'm sorry, that's for the teams.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
It's only for those two stations?
Yes.
Or,
Just two units.
so it's a, what is
24/7.
a fire fast response vehicle?
These are, so this is if you were to stage like an ambulance, kind of not necessarily in the station, but sort of in an area that you're expecting, sort of out in the field. And so they can reduce response times for high call areas.
I can speak to that a little bit. In Sylmar, we have Station 91. We got one of these vehicles because we have one fire truck. All of that. So he can move. So this fast response vehicle can get there to determine whether they, way ahead of
Need somebody else or not.
And it costs about $500,000 per vehicle?
Yeah, I
But
guess
that's with manning it and everything.
Oh, that's, okay.
64 is Venice, isn't it?
And-
Or is that 62 maybe?
Part of the compliment is it's only 8 hours a day and not on weekends and stuff like that. But we'll take what we get. So
There you
There's
go.
always a catch.
Okay. So it's important to look at the employer-related costs. I know the most important part of services is what is delivered to the residents of LA and the services that we're all getting. I live in LA too. But still the driver of city cost is staffing. So I just want to take a few slides and talk about sort of our staffing costs. So this shows kind of the trend in city staffing. The amount is slightly different than what I showed in the first slide because this is just regular authorities. You don't need to know the difference, but there's regular authorities and resolution authorities. Resolution authorities are only for a year, but they tend to be reauthorized. We just have been tracking regular authorities for the length of this chart. So I was able to update it for the first one, but I didn't want to go back and update it for however many years. So it's an indication of sort of the trend. Important thing to notice is before the recession, we were at 37,000 employees. We had ERIP, which is that early retirement program, and we dropped off to a low of around 31,817. That was about a 15% drop off, and we've been slowly climbing ever since. But we're still 8% down from where we were in 2007-8. So, the economy has recovered, but the city is still below where it was. We still don't have the same number of staff, and of course, staff are the people who are providing services. So you may have, if you notice, service is different from what you remember 15 years ago. That could have people.
And I'm assuming the goal is just to continue the trend of growth that we're seeing right now, not trying to get back to those numbers. Like, let's get back there as soon as we can, just when our natural rate of growth takes us
I
there.
think everybody has a different goal.
Okay.
So, I think that we should measure the quality of the city services by the quality of the city services, not the number of people who are doing them. Because staff is this major driver of cost. To the degree that we can control the size of our staff and control the amount that we're paying our staff, we can control costs. In fact, but if you can't do those things, then, so it's you have to, but then there are many people who just want to get back to that same number of people. Again, I think that the measure should be the quality of the services and not the number of people who are doing it. But it's, so we had a 2.4% increase from last year to this year. And now I want to, everybody's favorite part of staffing costs is the pension costs. First, let me say thank you all very much for making me one of the last people in the world to receive a pension, but let's talk about it. So the city's contribution, as we talked about, is based on the need and the commitment to fully fund the pension system. So we have a policy that we will pay the full cost that's required in order to make the pension system whole. And I've talked about already, because we talked about it earlier, how some of those costs are amortized over time, but there's a third-party actuary who provides us with those estimates of what the city's contribution would be, and we make that payment. And we also make the payment for other post-employment benefits, for retiree health care specifically, which is a little bit unique that we do that, because we've been doing it for a long time. So we're actually in much better shape there than other jurisdictions are, because other people pay as they go. They pay the amount that they need that year. We're doing the same kind of calculation on the health side, retiree health side, as we're doing on the pension side. So what does the actuary look at when they're deciding how much to pay for pensions? They look at the need of funding for the system, right? So how long are people going to be working for? How long are they going to live after they continue to work? What's going to happen with the city's payroll? How much are we going to be able to get for contributions from employees? How much are we going to get as a return on our investments? I feel like I just turned over to Jack now, but we make assumptions based on the recommendations of the actuary and based on what the boards decide to do. We're at around 7.25%. It may go down the next year. There are going to be some experience studies to look at what investment rate to use, and it's been signaled to us that they want to go down from 7.25 to 7. The boards may make that decision this January or February. We'll have to see. We don't know, obviously, because that do that. But so we look at all these assumptions. We make a series of assumptions based on what the actuary makes a series of assumptions. The boards adopt them, and this is all the different components, sort of the math that goes into how much we think we need to contribute every year, and the city then makes that contribution essentially. So how can we control? So pensions, obviously, people talk about it. We're underfunded. It's a major driver of costs. It's outrageous that people are still receiving pensions. Nobody else in the world does. How can we control those costs, right? Well, there's really only two things that you can do. You can change pension systems. The problem is, the issue is that city employees are already expecting to receive those pensions. In California, it doesn't make it real easy to roll back a benefit you've already agreed to give an employee. I came to the city with the expectation of getting this as part of my package. You can't just say halfway through, oh, remember what I told you when you signed up? Because I made a decision then based on what I thought I was going to get, right? So some of the reforms that you can do to lower the cost of pension, you can really only do them in California for new employees. But you can still do that. You can do pension reforms. It does cause, it can help you save money. You can do new tiers that provide less generous pension benefits for new employees. And we've done a little bit of that with varying degrees of success. To some degree, you could also ask those new employees to contribute more towards their pensions as another way to get more money from them. And then the other thing that you can do, which I think is legally easier to do, is you can manage the size and the cost of the city payroll. Hire fewer employees or keep the level of employees the same, and don't give them raises. So that's something that the city has more within its power and control. So of course the consequences of that are impactful.
So what is the city doing? Because I only heard like real suggestions.
Yeah.
Not that I care, because I'm not in pension at all, so I knew better not to go on this, because I don't want to get angry. I'm HR of 20 years, but I've never been a generalist, and there's a reason for that. But I'm hearing suggestions here, so it sounds like pensions are kind of going to stay the same. Are you talking to new employees and looking at
So we
those
went through,
healthcare changes
especially,
even,
sorry.
contribution?
So during the downturn, the city was pretty aggressive about trying to add new tiers. We added a tier 2 for civilian employees, which was a less generous benefit, and a tier 6 for police and fire. They're two separate pension systems. And increased contributions for employee health, which we had some discretion to do. It's just that we didn't, push came to shove a little bit, and we negotiated. Some of those were negotiated away with unions because they have an interest also in that. And so there was talk, there was a lot of work. I'm not going to judge whether or not it was how successful it was. But you can go back and look at the record and make that assessment yourself.
Sounds like it's hard to manage.
It's hard. It is
Very.
hard to manage. It's just the same. This is also hard, right? This is where the city has control. Just don't hire so many people. Just don't negotiate raises. But you've seen
Run into
some of the deals
problems.
that are.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
contracts
Well,
get
it
really
would be a whole lot better if they didn't do the backroom deals, when they were more open and transparent about negotiating the size and cost of the city payroll. They got, just a 6% a year increase in salary?
Who didn't know?
Didn't they just get a 6%?
Oh, please.
What's the increase in salary that they just got for the
We're
next
not,
year?
we're not really sure because it wasn't very transparent. But it's a sizable amount. I think when I did my numbers, I think they were like 16, 17%, but I think there's some double counting in that.
Over the 3 or 4 years.
It's over 3 or 4 years, so a raise of $15, or let's say 5% a year would be $15, but it might be counted as 5 the first year, 10 the second year, which makes it 15, and 15 would be 30. So, but it's less than transparent. It's unconscionable what they did to us in that. It was a slam bam, thank you, ma'am. No hearings at the personnel committee. Was discussed at the city council. But I don't want to.
No, it's I hear you, and there are. I'm not an expert in this field, thank goodness. For this moment, good, but the EERC, which is where most of these discussions does happen. It's a closed session. It has to do with labor law, and it doesn't mean you couldn't have an open hearing once it goes through that process. But the negotiations, I think, are sort of private. You don't want to necessarily have these discussions in front of the people that you're negotiating with. So there's
we asked Garcetti in our meeting with him to have open conversation. He says we don't like to negotiate in public, but the reason we want to negotiate in public is the crap that just was dumped on our table with this recent labor negotiation.
Yeah.
You're fortunate not to be involved in that.
I wish my husband got that kind of a deal at the company he works for.
I think we all do. I mean, the pension thing, just from looking into the fire department stuff already, I mean, it's something like 370 million or so for their salaries, and then it's another 170 million for overtime. And the argument that they have is it's so much cheaper for them to pay overtime than it is to just start dumping more employees in, getting more pensions on the books and all this stuff. I'd love to see the literature on that, just to be sure that the claims are accurate. But the numbers, like 40% versus regular salaries overtime, I mean, that just was lighting off like red flags all over the place for me. It's like, oh, this needs to get looked into in like a number of different ways. But it's because this is so very complicated.
Yeah, I think with fire specifically, they're unique in the city, and that we have constant staffing, which means that we always have to have
The 1,000 people.
fully staffed each one of our engine companies, because you can't send it out with fewer people. It's not safe for the people who are getting service. Not safe. So that's what really the cause of all that overtime. But yeah, go ahead.
And actually, one of the biggest problems with this situation is the fact that years ago, the city employees were quite spoiled. They didn't pay into their pensions and they didn't have to pay for their benefits at all. The city provided 100%. But in more recent years, they realized they couldn't continue to keep doing that. And that what really created the rift was the fact that, as my colleague back there stated, private companies have always had their employees have to pay into their retirement funds and pay a portion for their health care and so on. So they're like, well, wait a minute, how come the city gets it for nothing and we gotta pay? So there was always that problem. And now that the city employees are having to pay, they don't think that's cool, but then they don't realize they got away with not having to do it for years.
I can tell you, we know that it's pretty cool what we have.
Thank you. I got three parts to this. What percentage of our budget is paid out to pensions, and perhaps $1 a month too? And then additionally, in property tax, I'm not totally sure how that all goes, but how much does the city get and how much does LAUSD get in percentage?
So the city gets $2.2 billion in property tax. I don't know how much LAUSD gets. I think that they get more, because that's basically funding their full operation, is my understanding.
Basically, your real estate tax of 1%, not including the other 25% add-on for, voted indebtedness and other things like that, 311, this is round numbers. It goes about 40% to LAUSD in community colleges, about 25% to the county, about 20% to the city, or make 30% to the county, 25% to the city, give or take, and maybe 5% to other various entities like flood control districts. Those are round numbers those are round numbers.
And I would like to answer your next two questions by going to the next slide, because you want to know the amounts? Yeah, go ahead.
If I understand Jack correctly, you said 2.2%, but
2.2 billion, 2.2 billion.
25%?
2.2 billion.
Oh, billion, all right.
Yeah, that's the amount. Yeah, I don't know the overall property tax, I just know how much the city gets.
The grand list, or the assessed value for the city of Los Angeles last year was $611 billion.
Wow.
1%, that means we're paying $6 billion. 2.22 billion, which also includes the CRA, probably works out to about a third. But then there's also some voted indebtedness, I think, in that too.
So your question was one of the three questions was the amount that we're paying for pensions. This is the amount we're paying for pensions in the adopted budget. It's $1.2 billion. You can see that this has consistently been going up over the last 15 years. These are the CEO's projections. We don't make them ourselves. We pay somebody to make them. We have a contract. We ask the actuary to do that. So we're projecting continued increases in pension costs over the next 4 or 5 years, topping out at around 1.4 billion in 2023-24. But this year it's 1.2 billion.
Percentage on that?
If we go to the next slide.
Okay, I'm jumping ahead.
No, it's perfect. It's good. We're making progress. So there's different ways to look at it. And this is sort of the bright side of it, is that yes, pension costs are going up, but the portion of the city's budget that's dedicated towards the pensions actually is relatively stable. So I mean, it's gone up since 5, 6, but since around, I don't know, 12, 13, it's been in the 18, 19, 20% range. So if you look at the general fund, this year, about 19% of our general fund is going towards pensions. But of course, the special funds also pay for pensions, right? Special funds, through their related costs, are also making payments. So if you look at the pension costs in the context of the full budget, we're at around 12% of the city's budget goes
not
towards
bad.
pension funds,
That's
which
bad.
isn't as bad as it could
It's,
be.
yeah,
right?
20,
So,
yeah.
Let's say I want to be employed in the sanitation department. And so I apply for a position of receptionist, might be qualified. And I say, I don't believe in pensions,
Yeah,
so please don't do that.
yeah.
Would I get hired?
I don't think.
Can I just say, please, don't do this stuff, it's wrong, and don't do it?
I don't know that individuals can
No.
apply.
I don't believe it.
You opt out.
Yeah.
You can't opt out.
No,
You can't say, thank you, but no thank you, don't pay me that.
they'll say, don't take the
You
job.
don't have the discretion to turn down the.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Does that seem strange?
I think
No,
in
You'd
our
be a fool
USD,
to opt out.
when
Yeah.
a teacher who starts
You'd be a fool
working,
to opt
they
out.
take out a
Yeah,
third.
you don't get social
The
security.
third goes into your pension,
Uh-huh.
and then they'll.
Oh, a bunch of city employees do get
Besides
social
the
security,
taxes,
too. They pay social security and
Right,
get
so,
it.
right, so there's the city also, employees also contribute a portion of
The
the
teachers
salary.
absolutely do
Are
not.
you thinking
No,
that
they
you'll
don't
get
get
social
But
social
if you're
security?
like the city
Well, you
attorney's
get
There's no
office,
social
when
security,
you start,
because
they
it's
all
in
pay
lieu of
social
social
security.
security. Okay.
yeah, yeah. You can't stay in there.
But bigger.
So, how about if we finish expenditures and then we give ourselves a ton of stuff to do at the next one. So I only have one more slide, and this is basically the same one that I did earlier. This is sort of the areas of risk, which is areas that we think we might not have done a great job of estimating the actual costs for this year. So actually this year was actually kind of a pretty good budget. We did okay with funding things the way they should have been funded. But we did not include, and this is a major issue now, that is, we did not include funding for the sworn or civilian employee compensation adjustments if they happen, if we didn't know about them at the time of the budget. So the coalition deal, which has gone through now, although it hadn't gone through this time, it was pretty much locked down by April. So we fully budgeted for the coalition deal and some other sort of things that triggered off of that coalition deal. But there are many other deals which are going through. Police is the biggest one. That one just went through. Fire hasn't gone through yet. Engineers and architects, I think, just went through now. MCIA, which is our inspectors. City attorneys, we're not quite ready with yet. The very small group of employees in the CEO's office, their deal hasn't gone through. People who aren't represented by any union, that hasn't gone through. A portion of some of these are included in the budget if we knew what they were going to be before, because there are some increases that were triggered by the coalition deal. But for the most part, these deals are not budgeted in 1920, and that's going to be a challenge for us once we figure out what those amounts are. We're going to have to.
How much are you talking about? 35 million?
When the deals go through, so I would recommend you read our first FSR, which should be coming out towards the end of October. We'll do the calculation and have an amount then.
Beginning of October and end of October.
I'm not trying to be quick, but also police has gone, police is done, but so many of them are still in the process of being negotiated. We don't release amounts until it's come out. So, but we're looking at it, we're tracking it. It's going to be tough. It's going to likely it's going to be a challenge for us to deal with this year. Yeah.
Here's what I don't understand. So we make all sorts of projections for all sorts of things that we don't know.
Yeah.
Why don't we make a projection on this equally?
Yeah, good question. And really what it comes down to is, what Jack said before, is that we don't want to sort of, if we feel that, and this has been the policy of our office, the recommendation of our office, and it's been taken by the mayor and council over the years, is that we don't want to put an amount out there for a bargaining unit, because then the bargaining unit will see that as a floor, right? The union will say, okay, they put in $10 million for us, great. That means that's the minimum we're going to get. We're going to fight for 20 instead. So we don't want to signal how much we're willing to pay. before the deals have been done. Robert?
Well, what it means is that the number of positions is probably going to have to decrease. Or those positions that become vacant during the year will probably not be filled in order to balance the budget.
That is definitely an approach that we could take. I mean, it is, and it comes down to, we have a limited amount of money. If you pay people more, and you don't have more money, you're gonna have to use fewer people. And yes, that's definitely logical. I mean, we would hope that we would not have to do that it won't impact services. But of course, that's always a possibility. So. Okay, so that's one big thing that we didn't budget for. Started by saying how great the budget was, but that clearly is not great. This is sort of a standard thing. We always need to pay more for infrastructure than we do. We always would like to, deal with our lunar cratered streets and stuff like that. Right? More than we do. I mean, we've. It's not that specifically this year we under budgeted, but we always would like to do more for infrastructure. And then the budget, as it has in past years, to balance it, we had to do we had to include some reductions for departments. It's always a challenge to manage those reductions. Often departments are going to have to try to find ways to skimp and make things add up for those reductions. So these two are pretty standard. This is really the unique problem that we're facing this year with those deals being outstanding. So it's past 9. I'd like to stop here. What we'll have next time, we'll start with the outlook. We'll go through the financial policies, and then we'll go into the budget process and some recommendations for how to do budget analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Good job.
I'm gonna take a,
All in favor?